Right, from a child, I've always been interested. I wasn't interested in China. I wasn't interested in Vietnam. It was just always Japan. Anything Japanese. And one of my earliest memories is my grandfather taking me to a toy shop and saying, did I want the sort of the army toys or did I want the ninja toys? And I was like, ninjas, please, those. So I don't know. It's always been there. Right, I've not been to Japan now in nearly 5 years because of COVID, but I'm aiming to go this year. And as you say, I'm the tourist ambassador for Wakayama, so I've got to get back to Wakayama, and I try to promote the tourism there and get people interested in their old town. Yeah, that's a strange one, that isn't it? Why are the samurai that's just and the ninja both? Because I do both the ninja and the samurai. I've done both. I did the Book of Ninja and we've done the Book of Bushido. We've done many of that type of thing. But basically, I think it's like James Bond. There's an iconic image, and once you have an iconic image of something, and then a mystique and the mysteriousness of it, it seems to attract people. So, for example, the samurai seem to be better than most knights. They always appear to be better than the average human, a better fighter, more motivated, have a better, philosophy and more disciplined. But as we find out in history, that's not quite true. But that image is still with us. Well, maybe not one of the main lines, but an interesting fact is we always see samurai as these sort of tall on horseback warriors, and they were really small people. They are like 5 feet tall on ponies. So this idea in the films, we see them charging up and down. They're actually quite small, but and they only weigh. I don't know because in Spain I think it's different, but they weigh probably about 8 stone, which is tiny. And we get this idea of these big colossal figures in history. However, the biggest myth is probably Bushido. Probably it isn't that it didn't exist; it did exist. But the samurai and this idea that they're ultra loyal and they're ultra sort of dedicated to their lords is just not true. We know in history that absolutely. Well, let me put it this way: if the samurai were loyal to their masters, who did the samurai fight? Who did they fight? They only fought samurai. Very rarely did they go outside of Japan, which means that all of the arguments were about land grabbing, about killing your neighbors, about murdering your lord and taking over. There was all that in Japan. Right, I would say then, this is one of those books where every other book, if you try to get into the samurai, will tell you the stereotype. It will tell you, not, it won't lie, but it'll focus on only the bits that you already know. Samurai are brave, samurai fight well. Whereas this, what I've done is done the opposite. I've done the negative reflection. I found all the pieces of information that are shocking, like burning people alive, cutting heads off. Really trying my best to show the darker side of samurai life. Well, it actually stems from there's a really famous samurai called Tokugawa Ieyasu, yeah, and he was the first shogun, the man who brought Japan together. And on a promise, he promised his master that he would look after his son for the rest of his life and make sure his dynasty was okay. He didn't do that. He killed them, the entire family, and took over Japan. And I started to think, if that's one of the most famous samurai, and he's doing that, what is samurai life really actually like, and how true to the image is it? And that one question started the entire book. Yes, it did. It did very much. What I came to realize is the further you go back in time in Japanese history, the less obedient the Japanese were. Now the Japanese are very strict, obedient, and they will do everything. The trains run on time, and they will, they all subservient and bow. The further back you go, they really are much more. They have much more fire in their eyes and much more fight, and they're much more dramatic. And so over the years that you can see Japan has been compressed and compressed and compressed till we get to the 20th century with the car manufacturing and the massive boom and everybody bowing and agreeing. So it's just a lovely, looking backwards, you see a different Japan. Right. Well, actually, yeah, that's the real problem. The sources are the real problem, because a lot of people believe, for example, the big literature writings in Japan, the big stories like the Taiheki and the Heike Monogatari, these are these big epic stories. It's assumed they're true, and they're probably not true. So, and a lot of Japanese history probably didn't happen how we imagine it did. So what I decided to do was check, even in stories, even inside the lies, what was considered good and what was considered bad, because that will reflect what the people writing it believe to be good and bad. So it was actually probably too difficult to divide exactly what did happen and exactly what didn't happen, but we get a feeling for all of Japanese culture about what everybody believes is the correct way. Right. So what I did is I divided it. Let me just have a quick look. Basically, at the beginning, I got do you know the famous Bushido book, the Soul of Japan? That's the famous book written in the 1900s, which was a bestseller. So I decided to go through that first, get everything from that, and decide what he says and what he says is not right. Then I got the Hagakure. If you don't know, the Hagakure is a very famous manual that was written in the 1700s, but it was then really pushed in World War II. And this meant that all the Japanese in World War II considered that as Bushido. So I go through those two texts, I break down what they say, and then after that, the book starts, and I go through everything from weapons, personal relationships, hierarchy, stories within Japan, even the ninja, and how does it all come together. But then at the end, I decided, which I do with a lot of my books, is to break everything down into bullet points and make sure we've got the good, the bad, and make so if people at the end can get a nice roundup and find out exactly what the samurai thought was positive, what they thought was negative. And I went through it that way. Actually, a lot of it doesn't agree with the other stuff. So the idea of Bushido, everybody's like, oh, Bushido is this one idea across Japan that everybody follows. That is not true. It's not true. But the opposite is not true either, that everybody was totally different. But they were a lot of places where they didn't match because history had changed, time had changed. So, for example, one samurai wanted to stop the salt production. They were, they transport salt around the country, and they were fighting with their neighbors. And one set of samurai said, no, we'll block the salt and they can starve. Whereas the other samurai said, no, give them, my enemy, the salt. Let's fight them instead. Let them live so we can fight them. So you get this idea, there's totally separate ideas, but they still consider it Bushido. Oh, I really like anything to do with headhunting. I really find that interesting because we don't realize that the samurai, we look at Africa and we look at different East Asian countries for their history of headhunting. But actually, the samurai, that was their number one job. Let's go find heads. It was gruesome, and let's collect them, and they get paid for that. And that's part of the culture that nobody discusses on samurai because it's too gruesome. And that we see the samurai is too sophisticated for that. So that's my favorite bit because it brings the shock back to everyone of like, oh, okay, that's really horrific. Let's, like, oh, wow. And I think that's what I enjoy when people are shocked because it makes them change their idea about these very nice, sophisticated samurai, which they were superb, but they were also very brutal.